On October 2nd, 1969, Major League Baseball team, the Seattle Pilots, played their last game in Seattle, inaugural season as an expansion team. Not only did they struggle on the field, they struggled in the financial and political world that caused Seattle to lose their team after just 1 year. And they would have to wait another 8 years before getting another team in Seattle. We're going to dive into how a team lasted only 1 year before having to relocate today on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide, as you daily go through sports history to increase your sports knowledge. And today's trivia question to listen out for is, what team would the Seattle Pilots become after relocating? After 1958, when the Giants and Dodgers moved to California, really opening up Major League Baseball's reach across the country and allowing the West Coast to be an option for many teams, Seattle seemed prime to get their very own team, as they had had successful minor league teams there that played in the Pacific League, in the Seattle Rainiers, who had been playing there on and off since 1903. And at the time, Seattle was the third largest city in the West Coast. And they actually got courted by multiple teams, as the Cleveland Indians considered moving in 1964 to Seattle to try to strong-arm Cleveland into a new stadium. And the Kansas City Athletics were doing the same thing, looking for their best option, but ended up in Oakland instead of Seattle. So after losing out against possible relocating teams, Seattle looked to push for an expansion team. And they put together a financial group known as the Pacific Northwest Sports, Inc., led by Dewey Soriano, who was a former Seattle Rainiers pitcher and general manager, and was the president of the Pacific Coast League. So he had his hands in baseball, as well as being a successful businessman. But to have a team, you need a lot of cash, and he had a lot of local businesses that he had to partner with in order to raise the money for the expansion fee. And originally, Major League Baseball wasn't going to expand until 1971. However, this ownership group put pressure with the support of Senator Stuart Symington of Missouri, as the Athletics have left, and he didn't want Kansas City to be without a team. So he helped push up the expansion. And that year in 1969, the American League got the Kansas City Royals and the Seattle Pilots. And the National League got the Montreal Expos and the San Diego Padres. But the problem was that Seattle was struggling for a stadium. They had the stadium known as Six Stadium, where the Seattle Rainiers had played. But in getting a new team, they had sold the Rainiers to the Boston Red Sox, but had to pay the Pacific Coast League $1 million due to the loss of a standing team. But a year before, the county of Seattle had voted to put together a dome stadium that would become the Kingdome, and so they thought they were all set. And they told the MLB they could increase the Six Stadium from being about 11,000, and they actually increased it to 18,000 before the season started. And by mid-season, they were able to get it to 25,000 seats. But this wasn't a permanent structure, and it didn't have the facilities it needed, as if there was more than 10,000 fans in attendance, the toilets would back up. So they needed a new stadium. But that wasn't the worry at the time. They needed a good team on the field, and they actually did okay. They won 3 out of their first 4 games, but they struggled throughout the season as they didn't have a whole lot of star power on their team. And they finished with a record of 64-98, 33 games behind the division leader. And only the Cleveland Indians had a worse record in the American League. But they did do better than the National League expansion teams. The Montreal Expos and the San Diego Padres both lost 110 games. But that was okay, as many expansion teams struggle their first year, and it takes a few years to have a minor league system and have your players develop to have a good team. That's very common for expansion teams. But that's not why they only lasted 1 season. It was due to the stadium and the city. As the Pilots finished with 677,000 people in attendance that season, which was 20th out of the 24 major league teams. And that first season, the Pilots actually lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the new stadium that was supposed to be built had a petition going up to halt the project, as it was going to be built on where the Seattle World Fair was held, and they wanted that to be preserved. So they had to find a new location for the stadium, which would put back a new stadium even further. And the ownership group was struggling financially. And that year during the season, Major League Baseball was already worried. And by June, they already had talks to possibly move the team to Milwaukee. And during the offseason, the ownership group met with a car salesman, Bud Selig, who had been working to bring a team to Milwaukee ever since the Braves had moved. They met in secret for over a month, and during Game 1 of the World Series in 1969, Soriano agreed to sell the Pilots to Bud Selig and his group for $10.8 million. And though there were some local business owners in the Seattle area that quickly tried to jump in and try to help buy out Soriano and take some of his stake, although they didn't quite have enough money to match what Bud Selig has, as that they would have to have a loan as a part of it. And even in January 1979, a nonprofit group put together an organizational structure like the Green Bay Packers, where there would be no owner and it would be more of the city own the team. But the American League rejected that idea, and the Seattle Pilots actually declared bankruptcy just 7 days before the start of the 1970 season, clearing the way for them to move to Milwaukee, where they actually had the equipment drivers waiting in Utah to decide whether they were going to Seattle or Milwaukee. And when they arrived in Milwaukee, they changed their name to the Brewers and became a mainstay in baseball to this day. But luckily, just 8 years later, after the Kingdome was finally built, Seattle was able to get a new team in the Seattle Mariners, who have been beloved by the city ever since. And if you want to learn more about baseball history, check out This Day in Baseball, a daily baseball history podcast where your host Tom goes through all that happened this day in baseball history. We'll put a link in the description below for you to check it out. And if you like this episode, make sure you share it with a friend so they can learn all about the sports history that you just learned. And come back tomorrow for more daily sports history. And the answer to today's trivia question, what team would the Seattle Pilots become after relocating? And the answer is the Seattle Pilots became the Milwaukee Brewers.